Hello, hello students, how are you? Today we are looking at another interesting topic, respiratory system. Respiratory system, and at the end of this lesson, you will be able to state the types of respiratory system, list the characteristics of respiratory surfaces, and describe the mechanism of respiratory system in amoeba, insects, fish, and toad. Before we move on, you should know that we have four respiratory processes, all right, so that we don't mix them up. We have breathing, which is taking in of air. In the case of animal, we take in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. So that's breathing. Then we have external respiration. External respiration is exchange of gas between the air and the blood. Exchange of gas between the air and the blood. And we have internal respiration, which is exchange of gas between the blood and the tissue, the cells, all right? Exchange of gas between the blood and the tissue. And we have cellular respiration, which was our last topic that we looked at, which is the use of oxygen to produce ATP. That's energy. So let's move on. Types of respiratory surfaces. We have four major types of respiratory surfaces. We have the cell membrane, we have the body surfaces, we have the buccal, which is also known as mouth, through the mouth, and we have the gills. We'll look more into it. Let's look at some types of respiratory surfaces. One, and let's see examples of organisms where we can find them, like your cell membrane. Your cell membrane can be found in amoeba, in paramecium. Your amoeba, paramecium, they make use of their cell membrane for their respiratory as their respiratory system. Then we have the fishes and the tadpole. They make use of their gills as their respiratory surfaces. We have the toad, the frog, the earthworm. They make use of their skin as their respiratory surfaces. Insects, they make use of their tracheal system. Reptiles, birds, and mammal, which were examples of mammal, we make use of our lungs. All right, we'll still look at it into detail. Your frog and your toad, they, apart from making use of their skin, they also make use of their mouth. Then the leaves, they make use of stomata, and the stem makes use of lenticel. Let's move on. Characteristics of respiratory surfaces. What are the things that before a respiratory surface can function properly, what are the things that it must have? What are the features that you must see in such surfaces? The first one is that it must have a very large surface area. Why does it need to have a large surface area? It's simply to facilitate high rate of exchange of gases. There must be constant supply of in the case of animal, constant supply of oxygen. So there must be high rate of exchange of gases so that there won't be shortcomings, all right, in the supply of oxygen or the removal of carbon dioxide, as the case may be. The second one we are looking at, another characteristic, is that it must have a thin respiratory surface. Now look at the diagram below. Now let's look at this. We can see the blue line here. All right, from here to here we can see that blue line. All right, now look at it, compare it to this one here where the surface is wider. Now it's going to take a longer time for respiration, for movement to occur, because diffusion is actually the movement of molecules from higher concentration to lower concentration. So it's going to take a longer time for those molecules, these molecules that we are seeing, all these molecules that we are seeing, for them to move from this point to this point. All right, it's going to take a longer time. But look at this, that has a very thin surface. It's just going to the odor is very, very minimal to cross. All right, so all respiratory surfaces must have thin surface layer, all right, to help hasten diffusion. All right, we can see how diffusion, all right, is the movement, is another topic that we're going to treat on its own. All right, movement of molecules from higher concentration to lower concentration. So when it's thinner, there's faster movement. Another characteristic is that it must have a moist surface. All right, it must have a moist surface to help dilute or absorb or dissolve oxygen, as the case might be. If it's carbon dioxide, also carbon dioxide must also be dissolved into something. So when the surface is wet, oxygen can easily, or carbon dioxide, any gas that needed to be exchanged will be easily dissolved into such surface, and thereafter they can actually move into the body or the blood or leave, as the case may be. The next one we are looking at is permeability. Permeable, like allowed to pass. Surfaces must be able to allow movement or passage of gas, as the case may be. If I want to enter into something and there's no way for me to enter, what happens? There won't be movements. I won't be able to go through. So respiratory surfaces, they must be permeable. All right, they must be able to allow molecules of oxygen, molecules of carbon dioxide to pass through them freely. Another one we are looking at is that respiratory surfaces must be well ventilated. That means there must be abundant supply of oxygen to the surfaces and carbon dioxide to the surfaces to allow for exchange. Let's look at the last one. All right, there must be efficient transport system. Transport system is also a topic on its own. All right, so there must be efficient transport system to facilitate oxygen supply to the tissue. For example, blood is an example of is part of transport system. All right, it helps in moving digested food, or oxygen, carbon dioxide, anything that needs to move from one place to the other. All right, so blood helps to facilitate the delivery of oxygen to the tissue and the removal also of carbon dioxide from the tissue. So there must be efficient transport system within the particular organism where respiration wants to take place. Let's see the mechanism of respiration. We've mentioned some surfaces, and one of them is cell membrane. So let's see how how it facilitates exchange of gas. It's just by diffusion, very simple. Now, when we look at that arrow, you can see the green arrow, all right, taking out carbon dioxide. You can see the red arrow bringing in oxygen. So it's just as simple as that. You can see the membrane, very thin to allow for movement, all right, or exchange of gases. The next one we want to look at is the tracheal system. All right, the tracheal system. We can see some can we see? Okay, let me try and get it better. All right, so those dots, we can see them, they are called spiracle, and it leads into the tracheal system, and from there is hold on. All right, those spiracle leads into the tracheal, and from there there's exchange of gas. So through the spiracle, oxygen enters into the insect, then takes it into the tracheal system. There is exchange of gas within the fluid of the insect, and carbon dioxide is released, brought back through that medium. Then from the spiracle, carbon dioxide leaves the body of the insect. All right, if we look closely, those are the spiracles. This is just an example of of an insect. We can see the spiracle. This is spiracle here. This is another one here. This is another one here. All right, so at that point, that's where it leads into, that's the opening into the tracheal system. Then the next one we want to look at is body surface. All right, now when you look at these two organisms, this is your earth one, they make use of their body surface. You can see the arrow, oxygen is entering and carbon dioxide is leaving the earth one just through the body surface. All right, they make use of their body surface, their skin. The same for toad, your frog, they make use of their body. All right, even though your toad, we are still going to get that as three respiratory surfaces, but we are looking at body surface, just the skin now. So your toad makes use of the skin. You can see the arrow, you can see the arrow here, the red bringing in oxygen and the blue taking out carbon dioxide via the skin of the toad. Now when you look at the earthworm very closely, anywhere you see your earthworm, you see that the body is always wet. It's always wet. It's because that is its own respiratory system, and if it becomes dry or whatever, that's the end. It will not be able to exchange gas. It will not be able to absorb oxygen or release carbon dioxide, whichever one it wants to do. So the surfaces, that shows that the surfaces of your respiratory system must always be moist. All right, so your toad makes use of his skin, makes use of the lungs, of his lungs, and it also makes use of the mouth. All right, now let's look at this structure. You can see the air, the toad opens his mouth, and air goes in. Then from there it goes into this, can we see the cyclic structure? That's the lungs. All right, we can see it, this cyclic structure, that's the lungs there. All right, that's the lung, and it just go like that. Then from the lungs there is exchange of gas into the whole tissue, and also carbon dioxide is brought back into the lungs and it comes out just like that. So don't forget, your toad, your frog makes use of his skin, makes use of his mouth, and makes use of lungs for respiration. All right, let's move on by looking at mechanism of respiration in fishes. Your fish makes use of his gills for respiration. And how does he do it? He opens his mouth. The fish opens his mouth. As you can see in the picture, it opens his mouth. Then water flows in. Don't forget that this water is carrying oxygen. So the water flows in, and as it flows in, it flows out through the operculum. All right, that's through the side, this side. Now before this, in this diagram now, the operculum has been removed. All right, so that's why you can actually see through to the gills. Okay, so it flows through the mouth, then via the operculum out. Then while it is flowing, it flows, you can see that it's actually flowing over the gills, and as it's flowing over the gills, there is exchange of gas. Carbon dioxide is being released into the water via the gills, and oxygen is being taken in via the gills. It's taken in from that water via the gills into the system of the fish, and the fish can actually use it for aerobic respiration, which we have seen in our last topic. All right, in the case of fish, they possess what we call internal gills. That means their gills, they are inside, but there are some organisms that they have their gills outside, like a salamander. You can see the gills outside here. All right, and that's where exchange of gas takes place. That's their own respiratory structure. All right, we're going to continue in our next video. We'll look at mechanism of respiration in plants and that of man. Thank you.